Good morning, everyone. That's okay. Good morning in the back. Hello. It's good to see you all. Thank you so much for coming out on a gorgeous rainy day here in Richmond, Virginia. Thanks for stepping outside and coming into the beautiful VMFA. It's good to be here. Welcome to the Learning Exchange. My name is Todd B. Waldo. I am the founder and principal consultant for Hugh Helen LLC, and I'm so glad to see all your faces, so thanks for being here. I get to spend my time with some of you, with our clients, really thinking about the journey forward towards the things that are really important for them, thinking about their vision and their outcomes. We end up creating what I like to call strategic systems, which are really grounded in empathy and affirmed with data. In the community, we focus on economic development, entrepreneurship, and so I work with the city of Richmond, with VCC Social Enterprises, with Venture Richmond, Activation Capital, and others, really thinking about how do we have a journey to more equitable economic development and really holding space for our entrepreneurs, in particular for Black entrepreneurs. So that's the space that I hold. Was glad to be a part of this and creating this space for you all. More than a moment has been the theme. This has been a quarterly series. How many of you have attended one of the virtual events that happened during a learning exchange? Cool. So welcome back and welcome in person. We're not on the screen. So it's good to see you. But the theme's been more than a moment, and during these events is a reflection on how the pivot and innovation has shown up given the things that we lived through over these last few years. For many of my clients, I remind them that the conversation that got prompted in 2020, for some of us was a brand new conversation. Had never considered certain people, the impact of our policies, of our practices, the impact of our work, the opportunity of our work, thinking about communities in very different ways. For others, we've been having that conversation for a long time. You all just caught up, right? So it showed up in how we think about things. And for some of us, that changed how we live our personal lives. We explored things for the very first time. Many of you had never used Zoom before. You didn't know what Zoom was. You probably didn't even have a camera. Got you a nice ring light, set up a nice office at your home, right? Experience very new things for us as people. So as human beings, we started to show up differently to work, asking different things of our teams, asking different things of our leaders, flowing into how we created systems and solutions. So all of this is different, right? Banks change the way they lend money. Philanthropies become more engaged with their ecosystem partners. We're using the word ecosystem, right? Investors deployed more of their assets to combat threats against vibrant communities. Lots of activity. And we found out that equity actually matters. It's important. And if we did not center equity in our work, it impacted our effectiveness. It impacted the results that we were going to pursue. So that's been really good work. Many of us understood that, things that are important can change, right? And so how do you build sustainability? How do you have resilience, consistency? So it's not just a moment, it's a movement. See the difference, right? How do you hold on to people and who they are as human beings and all the various things that make who we are and the things that might get in the way of the opportunities that they want to pursue, living the life that they want to live because their zip code matters so much. The color of their skin matters so much. Their body parts matter so much. And the effectiveness and the opportunity to live their quality of life. So, in thinking about that, how do you have a movement, not a moment, in pursuit of more equity for all of our communities? Hopefully today is a way for us to hold on to that and really concretize that, codify that in the things that we're doing every single day. I appreciate that you all are here probably because you care about community. Is that right? You guys care a little bit? Yeah. So converting that care into clear action, that takes real work, real deliberate work. I often say with clients in this space, there's a tendency for us to want to arrive, right? To have a conclusion. Are we done with equity? Are we done? Can we move on to the next thing? What's the plan? How many steps does it take until we're done? There's a desire for a destination, for a conclusion. This work is about a journey, right? It's perpetual, it is continual. our pursuit of equity, right? It takes time, it takes effort, and guess what, folks? We do not get there accidentally. We get there very deliberately, right? We get there on purpose. And it takes our collaboration to do that. I have just one perspective of who I am and my life experiences, so I need perspectives of other folks to identify the gaps, identify the experiences of other people, and flow that into the solutions that we're creating. Does that make sense? Right? So that's what we're thinking through. The entire series has been looking at different ways to pursue that equity and how to flow that into our community development work. And today we're going to continue that with our time together. So let me kind of walk through what we're going to do today, and then I'm going to introduce to you our keynote speaker. So we're going to hear from Amber Kuchar-Bell. I will tell you about who she is in a moment. And then we'll have time to just eat and talk with each other. We're going to finish out our time with a conversation with CEO Amir Kirkwood, and then we're going to send you back out into the rain. Unless you just want to hang out at VMFA, because there's some really nice art here, but you will have to leave this room. So that's our time together. If at any point you need the restroom, just make your way through the hallway over to my left, and then they're in the space behind there. And just a note, just watch where you're stepping. We've got a lovely film crew here, and we don't want you to trip over the cameras or the lights, okay? Everybody good? Lovely. So let me introduce to you all our keynote speaker for today. With us is Amber Kuchar-Bell. She is Opportunity Finance Network's Chief Strategy and Operations Officer and is responsible for strategic initiatives, corporate budgeting, and facilitating partnerships with major financial institutions, philanthropy, and new corporate partners. Prior to joining OFN, Amber was the CDFI Program and NACA Program Manager at the Community Development Financial Institutions Fund. She was responsible for the design and implementation of $1.25 billion CDFI Rapid Response Program to help CDFIs respond to the economic hardships caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And she managed over $200 million annually in grants and loans to over 300 organizations. I am glad that you are here. I am glad that Amber is here. Please make Amber feel welcome, and let's get her to the stage.
Hi, I am so proud and humbled to be here today. I forgot my notes, take off the badge. And so I want to start off with being a little vulnerable. So about 3 weeks ago, my father passed away unexpectedly. And so I'm going to have notes because life is hard. And over that last 3 weeks, I've been doing a lot of reflecting, right? A lot of thinking, and thinking about all the big questions, right? But in that process of reflecting and questioning, it really fortified my commitment to community development. Like, I am here to make the world a better place to live. We are here to make the world a better place to live. And my dad taught me 3 things. Be curious, work hard, and fight for justice. And thinking about those things, you know, that's how I've come to be, right? And that's how I think about equity and community development, is be curious, work hard, and fight for justice. So let's start with curiosity. Questions. I love questions. I used to have a nickname growing up of, she has a question. Like, that was like how people thought of me. And some questions, you know, some questions are easy. Like, you brush them off. Like my 5-year-old asking me why we can't have chocolate for dinner every night, or why can't I lick the lid of the milk can? Like, those are easy questions, and we brush them off. But there's some questions that can change your life if you do them justice. There's some questions that, if you really think about it, can fundamentally change who you are and the world around you. So when I was 22 years old, right out of college, I graduated from UCLA, and I graduated with a degree in international development studies, and I went to Nicaragua to save the world, right? Like, I am ready to go. You've been there, you know, fresh. And I was working on a coffee cooperative in Nicaragua, and I'd been there a few months, and I really saw firsthand what capital could do. But I also saw firsthand that despite best intentions and a really good business plan, without access to capital, you couldn't do anything. And I was like, yeah, this is it. Like, this is it. You know, feeling really good about myself. And this woman came up to me. She's probably 25 years old, and she's probably 5 foot something. And she comes up and she looks at me, like this, staring right at me, and she goes, "Why are you here? ¿Por qué estás aquí? Why are you here? Go home. Go home." She goes, "When you spill milk, what do? You pick up the glass first, and then you clean the milk up. Go home and pick up the glass." Now, as a 22-year-old, I was there to save the world, and that was really hard to hear. But it is really an important question to do justice. I thought I was doing the right thing, but that was not the role they wanted me to play. And I had to be respectful and do the hard work of being humble and saying, "You're right. I did not have the answers. That was not the role they wanted me to play, and I needed to find my role. So, you know, fast forward, I went home. I thought about it. How do I respectfully, centering equity, play my role, play my journey? So I recently read an article from the George Washington School of Public Health, and it said, social systems aren't naturally inequitable. They've been intentionally designed to reward specific demographics for so long that the system's outcomes may appear unintentional, but they're actually rooted in discriminatory practices and beliefs. We've been gaslighting ourselves, right? And it said, continued on to say, equity is a solution for addressing imbalanced social systems. Justice can take equity one step further by fixing the systems in the way that leads to long-term, sustainable, equitable access for generations to come. Think about that. Equity and justice. Now it's our questions that you're going to talk about later. How do you think about our role, your role, in equity and economic justice? Okay, so now, fast forward 20 years. I've spent 20 years in community development. I've been trying to answer this question about how to drive access to capital and credit in underserved communities, because that's where I found my role. But I do it by trying to listen and empower the communities to help people achieve their dreams by supporting, not doing. Not doing, but supporting. My role. Yet, there's so many more questions. And what comes after the question, though, is important. Action. That's the second thing that my dad taught me. You gotta work hard. You gotta work hard. So, like my dad taught me, actions matter. Your actions matter, my actions matter, and actions can take and make change. You gotta think about that, right? You got to question, and then you got to work hard and show up. So, for example, I spent nearly 10 years at the Treasury Department at the CDFI Fund. And the CDFI Fund is an organization within Treasury that provides grants and awards to community development financial institutions like Virginia Community Capital, like VCC, the one we're here to support. And, you know, by naturally working at Treasury, I thought I was doing a great job, right? I'm getting money to underserved communities. I was doing the work. Yet, early in 2018, I went down to Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico was still coming out of the recovery efforts from Hurricane Maria. And I went down to Puerto Rico representing the CDFI Fund to talk about the programs to see if we could help. And I realized before I went down there that the CDFI Fund, an organization, an institution designed specifically to channel capital to underserved communities and people and places, had not made an award to an organization headquartered in Puerto Rico in 9 years. 9 years. We were doing good work, but we hadn't made an award to Puerto Rico in 9 years. The vast majority of the island is a persistent poverty designation. That means for 30 years, they have been in persistent poverty. And the CDFI Fund hadn't given an award in 9 years. That's a question that needs to be followed by action, right? So I learned when I was down there, there was a strong network of cooperativas. What's a cooperativa? It's the island's equivalent to the credit union. They have their own regulators, they have members, they have deposits, and they have a strong infrastructure in the island. And yet the fund hadn't supported them. Why? I asked myself that question. So I learned that it was not just about understanding the barriers, but it was inviting them in. So the first time I went down there, I invited them in, and I had this catchphrase. It was education was the first part. Nobody had said, hey, we have this program for you. We have millions of dollars to invest in your communities. But nobody had asked them. So the first thing, I was like, tengo dinero. I have money. Tengo dinero. And apparently they thought it was funny. They put it on a chart later, and they were like, she has money. Like, she has money to give us? Like, that was novel. Like, here, come. But you have to apply. Like, I can't just give you money. You got to come to me, right? Like, your small businesses can't just be like, oh, I need money. They have to apply. They have to show up, too. But it's our job to let them in, right? And so the first thing I needed to do was help think about the program design. So some of the things that we did were clarify the rules. We could accept audits in Spanish. They didn't have to do the work of translating it to English because there's a lot of rules in the federal government, believe me. And some of them are made up, self-imposed, like audits in English. We could clarify that. We found out that they have their own regulator, and we created an MOU, or a Memorandum of Understanding, to get the financials and treat them the same way as we created processes and programs for credit unions in the States. So, these are not sexy actions. These are doing the work, making small changes, and showing up, right? But it had a huge impact. So the first year in 2018, we made 6 awards for $1 million. From 2019 to today, guess how much money we've invested? $76 million. $76 million. And that was from 9 years without a board in Puerto Rico. Those are what small actions of saying, I have money, come to me, right? And saying, I'll take the barrier down, I'll help you, I'll make small changes, and that's in the federal government you can make changes. Imagine what you could do in the private sector, right? So now, where am I? It wasn't easy. It was mundane, but you got to challenge your assumptions. These were assumptions that we made in the federal government. They were assumptions that they made about the federal government and assumptions the federal government made about itself, right? I'm one person. Like my dad taught me about hard work. I'm evidence that one person, even in a huge federal agency, can make changes. And some of those awards happened after I left because the systems were created, the pathways were done, people bought in. So now, I'm at Opportunity Finance Network, thanks to Amir, who brought me in and then promptly left. Where is he? I see you, and I have words. No, but you know, at OFN, Amir started this work of thinking about equity and centering equity in our work. And again, we are a community-driven organization. We provide support to CDFIs. We're doing good work. And yet, we were not going deep enough. Just being in the right industry doesn't make you good. You still have to do the work, right? So OFN really had to ask hard questions about what do we need to do to center equity? And we started this work with Amir. You know, we use money, right? We get money into our CDFIs. We strengthen the network by trainings and convenings. And we use our voice by going to the Hill and advocating for CDFIs. That's how OFN does it. But when we looked at it, we were bringing all these new sources of capital into the CDFI space, but where were they going? Where were they going? They were going to a small number of CDFIs. We were fortifying a small number of CDFIs. We had to look at ourselves and say, we need to expand the number of CDFIs in our portfolio. We need to go small. We need to go and examine our portfolio and make sure that the money was going to the communities and the CDFIs were in touch, that were deep. Because these CDFIs are serving communities of color, and who you lend to matters because they are invested in their communities. It's a bottom-up approach, right? So we launched the Finance Justice Fund, and we had a strategy, an intentional strategy to go deeper. But intentionality isn't enough. You gotta make changes, right? You gotta change. So we intentionally tried to drive capital into smaller CDFIs, but we did it in a couple of ways. We looked at our policies. Where is the bias in our underwriting? How do we get our boards comfortable with perceived risk, right? So we created some special pots of money, and we're gonna prove to you that this is okay. And then we created intentionality around how do we prioritize which CDFIs get into the pot, right? And change how we think about it. We looked deeper. We looked at perceived risks and historical practices, and specifically prioritizing and underwriting CDFIs and asking really what is risk and what is perceived risk. So after this, it requires work, reflection, outreach. Like we had to listen to our members and look at ourselves. Now, of the Finance Justice Fund loans, over 41% are to CDFIs under $25 million. And we look at our active pipeline, 56% of these have less than $25 million. We've made changes, and I'm really proud of that. Doesn't mean we don't have more work to do. So in closing, this was my path to centering equity in community development. This is what my dad taught me, right? Curiosity, hard work, and being a fearless advocate for justice. Now, the question remains, what are you gonna do? ¿Por qué estás aquí? Right? Why are you here? And what are you going to do to center equity in community development?
Amber, thank you for being here. Thank you for making that choice. Thank you for being present with us. And for holding on to what your dad taught you. I think being curious, working hard, and fighting for justice, if you don't hear nothing else, right? Get in some good trouble, as another gentleman would say. I'm an engineer. Anybody else an engineer? Am I by myself? All right. Electrical engineering, NC State. I was taught to build systems. I built systems throughout my entire career. But I was taught to build the technology first. And you think about the people later. It wasn't until I started doing work in the community and volunteering and showing up that I realized I was backwards. So I had to unlearn what I was taught and figure out how am I person-centered in everything that I do? How do I build systems focused on people? Involve people in the development of those systems. Let them tell me what outcomes they want for their success. But my education didn't teach me that. I actually learned that from some of you all. How do you rethink what you do every single day, centering people and who they are and what they say they want for their lives, right? So this is all work that we have to do. And those three things, if you are curious and working hard and fighting for justice, then we can do that. Then we got a shot at this not being a moment. We got a shot at this being a movement. And if we do that, for my daughter, and for your daughters, and for our sons, maybe their world's a little bit different. And wouldn't that be fantastic? So what we're going to do as we transition to lunch, we're going to ask some questions. We've got 3 that we're going to put in front of you, some cards that come around to your table. Here are the 3 questions we want you to consider as you all are enjoying your lunch. The first one is, what is one thing you can do to center equity in your community development work? That's a question. What are the barriers to equitable community development in your community, and how should they be addressed? And the third is, when you envision equity in your community, what comes to mind? These will be on your table. There'll be 1 per table. Feel free to talk about that. And then in a little while, I'm going to actually conversate with you all for a little bit and see what kind of popped up and what was interesting to you all. And then I'll spend some time with Amir here on stage. All right? So enjoy your lunch. If you have any dietary restrictions, please let the servers know. And then we'll all talk together here in a little bit. All right? Enjoy your lunch. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. I'm going to be really rude, and I'm going to interrupt your conversation. So what I'd love to do, because we have an opportunity to really learn from one another, I want to hang out with you all. And I would love to hear maybe 1 or 2 things that you discussed at your table around these questions that would be really good for the whole room to hear. Right? Not every table had the same question, and so we're gonna just learn from each other if that's all right. Sound good? All right, so let's start. What are the barriers to equitable community development in your community, and how should they be addressed? Who answered that question? Raise your hand. All right, in the back here. Let's come back here. So when we think about barriers to equitable community development in our communities, how should they be addressed? What's maybe one thing you all share that the whole room should hear? You have something? All right, could you stand with me? All right. What's your name?
My name's Ashley.
Hi, Ashley. And what do you do in the world? Who do you work for?
I work at VCC. I work with all of those small business lenders. I'm their sales team specialist.
All right, so when we think about these barriers, what's one thing that we can do?
One thing that we can do is make sure, as a whole, that we're making the impact that we want to. I mentioned when we were talking about it was, when you go in, you don't want to be white savior. That was one of the things we brought up, and making sure that just because your intentions are there and they're meant to be good, that doesn't make them pure. So making sure you're actually talking to the people within your community that you're trying to impact, because they're really the ones who are going to know what needs to happen there. And we also talked about, sometimes the money is going to come from those higher up levels, and but you have to have people who understand the language, who understand the culture, who understand what's actually going on with those communities to make sure that money is being disseminated with that face, so to speak, so that they understand that there's that trust being built. So actually digging deep into the community and building the trust first.
That's perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. One of the phrases I use in my class at VCU, I talk about my students creating solutions with, not for. With your customer, with the community, not for your customer, for your community. That's great. Thank you. Maybe one more. Barriers. What can we do? One other thing that'd be good for the whole room to hear. What other table talked about it? Others over here? Barriers? One other thing? Nothing else? Going once? I don't know if this is helping. Draw the answer out? All right. So, what's one thing you can do to center equity in your community development work? Who answered this question? Show me your hands. What's one thing you can do? All right. Maybe one thing that'd be good for the whole room to hear? Something you all shared? Yeah. Stand with me. What's your name?
Jessica.
Hi, Jessica.
And I'm a Richmond Forum subscriber, so
Oh.
I know you already.
Yes. I get to hang out at the Richmond Forum every often. So, all right, Jessica, we're talking about one thing that you can do to center equity in your community development.
The biggest thing we talked about at our table, we come at community development work from different viewpoints, but the thing we shared is that we really have to listen. And I know that that's not a revolutionary thing for us to say, but it's so important, and we're finding different ways to do that in today's environment.
So, question for you all. How many of you all have learned like practical tools, methodologies for good listening? Does anyone have one that they've used that's like, hey, this really helped us listen to community, gather insight? Yeah. What's one thing you did to help you listen?
In my work, we perform community engagement. That's our work. And we do one-to-ones, which are scheduled sort of interviews, but are conversations to try to learn about the other person's why and self-interest. And we do surveys that are curated by community members, and listening sessions that look like focus groups, but they're also opportunities for community bonding and relationship building.
That's awesome. Any other tools, methodologies that help with listening? Because we say that, and many of you don't know how to listen to your partner, but like we talk about listening, but we don't know how to do it. Any other tools, methods that are helpful for listening? Yeah.
So stop talking.
Like we're doing right now, yeah.
But stop talking, and that means verbally as well as in your head. Dedicating the brain space and the head space to what's being shared.
Yeah. Active listening, right, takes practice. So practice that with your partner when you get home. All right. When you envision equity in your community, what comes to mind? Who answered that question? Is that over here in the front? So what's one thing when we envision equity in our community that the whole room should hear? Over here? Oh my goodness. What's your name?
Charisse.
Hi, Charisse. What's one thing that the whole room should hear about when we envision equity in our community?
So we had a good conversation in general, but I think the come away is that there is no end game. I guess Amber said it best, is like she thought it was supposed to look one way, and even so, I'm gonna say it. I'm a geriatric millennial. Carolyn, don't be mad at me wherever she's sitting at. Okay.
Geriatric millennial over here. Yes.
So, but in saying that, my mother got bused into her school. She's from Jackson, Mississippi, and I guess for me, I'm like, the work was being done, but there's still more work to be done. And I guess if I take the boundaries off of, there's some kind of like finish line, then I can actually dig deeper into the work. And I think the thought process is like the continuation. Like, don't feel like there needs to be an end, and that the work will always be here. And also be open to the pivot of change, right? The world is always changing. We didn't know the pandemic was going to happen. We were going to work from home. We were going to lose loved ones from sickness and things like that. And if anything, we've all gone through some kind of change in our lives. So if I'm more open to the change, I can lean more into it without falling in love with the process instead of what the end goal is.
Great. Change can foster innovation. How many agree with that? That change can foster innovation? That's a choice you make. That's a choice. We often say, like, life teaches us, change can spur us. But those are choices you make every single day. This is active, this is deliberate. Those are choices to say, we need to do this differently. And it is continual. I tell my clients, I was one way before I found out about Ahmaud Arbery's murder. When I found out about it, I was a different human after, okay? Life's happening all the time, right? So that changes who we are as humans. It changes our work. It changes the people that we serve. And so it absolutely is continual. So we learn brand new barriers that we didn't know about before, right? How many of us didn't even care or focus on our mental health in our workplaces before 2-3 years ago, right? It wasn't a conversation we were having, and now we are, because we understand it impacts people's effectiveness, the ability for folks to work together, right? That's new, exacerbated by the pandemic, because we were stuck in our house and they confront our issues. But we're better, because everybody's going to therapy, right? All right, one more thing. When we envision equity in our community, something else that comes to mind that the whole room should hear. Give me one more. One more. I gotta do my dance again. One more thing. You are some of the thank you. I was like, you are some of the smartest, most thoughtful people. All right, when we envision equity, one thing that comes to mind.
We talked about education. And we talked about it in a lot of different ways, like, just sharing information and exposing and sharing opportunities. And that's basically what we were saying. It was something else too. What was it?
Where zip codes should
Zip codes. Zip codes shouldn't matter.
Yeah.
But we realized that is what a lot of opportunity is based on, the zip code.
Yeah, that's right, thank you. I've even referred to zip code equity as a way to frame that yes, where you live is a determinant of everything. Everything. The air you breathe, the food you eat, where you can and cannot walk, what you can do with your body, where you get educated, how you end your life. That zip code matters for everything. And when you're a good student of how the systems work, you understand how decisions were made about where resources are, how they're funded based upon a zip code, right? Please give yourselves a round of applause for being so thoughtful. So for our next portion of our time together, I am gonna bring up to the stage Amir Kirkwood. Amir joined VCC Social Enterprises just over a year ago after our founding director, Jane Henderson, retired after leading for 16 years. As president and CEO, Amir leads the organization in its mission to promote and enhance quality of life for the communities VCC Social Enterprises serves. Amir has more than 20 years of banking and economic development finance experience. Prior to joining VCCSE, he served Opportunity Finance Network as their Chief Investment and Network Officer and managed all member-related operations, including investment portfolio management, membership services, peer learning programs, and research. Amir helped the firm raise capital to support long-term financial needs of the CDFI industry and was responsible for the management of OFN's $900 million of investments in CDFIs, and is a member of the Investment Committee and Credit Review Committee, where he assisted the firm in risk and portfolio management. Everyone, please welcome Amir to the stage. So we're gonna hang out and talk for a little bit. So we're gonna treat this like we're in our living room. It's a big living room. It's very nice here at VMFA. Quick reactions to what you just heard. We got some reactions to our questions. How did that resonate with you, what folks were saying?
Resonated a lot with me. It's exciting. It's affirming of the work that we do, because the need to make sure that we're listening, that we're centering it in communities, is the essence of why CDFIs were created. We are CDFI, and we ought to, every day of the week, reflect the principles and values behind why organizations like CDFIs are created. So it's really good to hear not only that our staff feels that way, but the community and the representatives of the communities are calling for that too. So
Yeah.
I think it all.
That's great.
Yeah.
When we think about Richmond, city of Richmond, the Richmond region, if it was a case study, like if we were like studying Richmond and what's happening here, thinking about the relationships we have, it's a very relational place. Like we all kind of know each other. Like that's a great thing about being in Richmond. On our journey, right, towards centering equity, doing that better, where do you think we are? Like, are we, if we were a child, like, are we like infant? Are we a toddler? Are we a teenager? I got a 15-year-old. Are we a teenager? Are we grown? Like, where do you think we are on the journey?
You know, it's interesting. You cannot, you almost have to sort of see Richmond as a wise old grandmother. Because this is the heart of the former South. This is the place where 2 or 3 years ago, a very bold effort at tearing down statues that represented, one of the people in the audience said that they were granite and stone burning crosses that were taken down. That takes a lot of wisdom. It takes a lot of courage. And it's not something that you engage in just because you're in a radical moment. There's some reflection on history that had to be a part of that. So I'm leaning much more towards a more seasoned person.
So not only did Richmond evaluate its history, the things we tried to honor with monuments, names of buildings, names of streets and those things. So that all happened.
Yeah.
But our healthcare was different. We had the pandemic, and that shifted, not just Richmond, that shifted the entire planet. So that, like, what the pandemic kind of spurred in us, what citizens and the people spurred in us by going outside and demanding justice, and some of them pulled statues out of themselves. Like, we did a lot. How did that help push us and propel us, if it did, and if so, like, how do you think it pushed us?
I think what made it I think made it powerful was that the city, and this might be where the toddler comes in. The toddler is the city that's now building a tech sector. The toddler is the city and region that has a pharma manufacturing boom that's happening. The toddler is a city, one of the largest millennial destinations in the country right now. So you have this part of our region that's growing in one direction, and then you have the vestiges of its history at the same time. So what made it powerful is that you had to make a change at this point because you have a generation of folks who are not attached to that past and were saying to themselves, that's not acceptable. That's just not acceptable. And so all of those moments converged, I thought, and what the country saw was some of the most dramatic moments of shaking off the past. But it left very clear that while there are lots of assets in Richmond, there are parts of the city and the region that still need the investment by all of us in the room, by local government, by communities to sort of shift something that is still suffering as a result of that past as well.
So Richmond, quick question. How many of you, like Richmond native, you grew up here? This is life for you. Okay, cool. Very often we talk about Richmond, and sometimes we paint Richmond like it's unique. Now, yes, there are distinctions to who Richmond is and what Richmond's story has been in the story of this country, but our challenges aren't, right? So if we just zoom out a bit, so if we think about equity across race, climate justice, housing affordability, small business, entrepreneurship, food access, like all, those are hard in a lot of places. So this work of centering equity, I'm wondering why it's important, but in particular, why is it important not just here in Richmond, but everywhere?
Because change happens, communities change and they grow. And what we notice, and again, you see it in Richmond, you see it everywhere, there has always been a percentage of the society that has been left behind. And my contention is that because, and this is really powerful for me as a person in the community development movement, my contention is because we've never actually had a real discussion about equity. So I was looking at the statistics on the demographics in Richmond and where the population has come and gone. Like every city in America, population started to turn late 70s, going into the 90s. Then all of a sudden it's starting to shift back up, population growth again. If you look at that, you also can overlay real estate development over it at the same time. And at those decline points, there became these massive amounts of investment in real estate in the markets. I grew up in Chicago. Names you all have heard in the paper like Cabrini Green and things like that are all luxury communities right now. So what happened in terms of the folks who were in the communities? Was anyone focused on giving them a piece of equity out of this change and this transition? And that's what happened too often in the past. So you have a glowing, growing city, but you don't have a good percentage of the population having any benefit from that as the growth occurs. So what we're talking about with equity today really is starting with, well, no, we're not going to sort of ignore the other factors that create opportunities for people to be engaged in the process, because we're looking at the buildings and the banks and everyone else, and that looks like it's a great story, and we're missing the fact that there is still like the risk that we repeat the past and have another class of folks that are not being able to take advantage of the growth that occurs in the community, because we're not being honest about the facts that create that disparity. It's not about the fact that, you know, they just weren't able to do X, Y, or Z, or they didn't pull themselves up by bootstraps. No, there is institutional racism. There is institutional structures of what blocks wealth. There's geographic elements to it. Environmental justice. It is pretty plain that when you look at where is the greatest level of toxicity in a community, it's low-income communities. So you're not only dealing with the educational challenges, the job challenges, but you're also dealing with long-term toxicity in the environment in those communities. So you have to lay all those things out as part of the equity discussion, and then layer in the financing, layer in the real estate development, layer in the job investment, because those things will happen. They just happen cyclically. It's a question of whether they happen and it's happening while leaving a certain segment of the population behind.
I think about, as a society, as a community, we get real comfortable with suffering. That's their problem. Like, we good over here. I don't have to worry about feeding my kids tonight. I don't have to worry about the bus route and the bus being late, and I can't get my kid, and now I can't stop at food line, and now, right? And we get comfortable. That shooting wasn't in my neighborhood. That storm didn't tear down my house. Like, we get comfortable with that. So I hear that we have to not be comfortable, but then also be deliberate about our inspection of what makes those differences possible. I wonder what holds us back from doing that work? Like, just as people, but also we gotta flow that into our institutions. So you've given us the solution a bit, like what makes that hard? What holds us back from doing that?
You know, I think it's partly human nature to want to sort of, to your point, run to what is comfortable. It's partly, you know, from my perspective, an overinflation of our individual contribution, to be honest with you, and not a full recognition of how it really is a community, it is a village that leads to where we are. And so it's easy to rest on those things. When in reality, I know I'm where I am because of all the people who have fed into me. I am able to sit here right now today because of 86 other employees at VCC who do a ton of work that I have no idea what's going on day to day. But some reason the paycheck comes in on time, some reason the lights are on.
Is your CFO
customer
here?
service? Yeah, he's right up there.
Thank you, CFO. Thank you.
But that is just a small acknowledgement of just the fact that I know that I am a result of something. And I think that being able to sort of recognize that within oneself, recognize that within communities is a critical step to how we center equity. I think there's another piece, which is just not being afraid to call it out for what it is. And every one of the organizations here has a choice to say very clearly, I will not engage in activities that do not put equity at the front of what I do every day. And it has to be with your board, it has to be with your management team, it has to be within your employees, it has to be how you service your customers or your community. And you have to hold yourself accountable to it on a regular basis. There has to be some introspection about when you do it, when you don't do it. And you can't be afraid of challenging yourself when it does not happen.
Being fearless,
Yeah.
being courageous,
Yeah.
being honest.
Yeah. And then recognizing that it's incremental too.
Yeah.
And that the typical small business in Richmond is not about to have a mission statement that says we're going to center equity in everything we do. But we as organizations do put that in our statements. And we then go out and work with small businesses. Have you challenged that small business when you're making a loan to them to just consider the concept that there is an economic and an environmental cost to the decisions you're making as a business. But then for us as a bank, what's the trade-off? I can't go to a small business and say, you have to include all these standards for change in how you operate and approach them with the same credit box that every other financial institution is approaching them with. Because they're going to look at me and say, so what is the point of doing anything with you, and what is the point of me in taking on change, knowing that there's no real benefit to me for doing it.
That's good. I think sometimes we lose sight of how important it is for us to create solutions where people recognize, oh, you thought about me and what that does to add value to what we created. Like, we've all felt that, right? When you step into a place, like, you don't like butter on your bread, and you go to somebody's house and they have an alternative to butter because, like, I know you don't like butter, and so this is what we did for the bread. Like, oh, you saw me. Thank you. I can enjoy the bread. But seeing you see me, that's powerful. So now I want to bank with you because you see me, right? But that is less about a human being, but put it into the institution, to your practice.
Yeah.
So even if as a human, I don't know how to do that, you've given me a way to work that gives me a shot at doing that.
Yeah.
So everywhere, right? This is a challenge, there are opportunities for us. If we do think about Richmond specifically and the things that are here, what are the unique opportunities we have here within Richmond and this community to apply some of what you're talking about and to implement some of these solutions?
Well, I mean, I think that there's some very specific assets that Richmond as a community has. 1.3 million people in this region, that's significant. That means you have every industry represented. You have every, you have institutions of higher education at levels that are, I think, as impressive as, New York and Chicago and other institutions, other cities. So there's these assets that are there. The question is, do we intentionally go out, find and build partnerships, and start identifying ways to work together to do this type of work to change and help grow communities? One of the exciting things about being at VCCSE is that we have a 15-year heritage that's been built up. We're a pretty stable organization. We have the ability to have a lot of impact. One of the more surprising and challenging things I've learned in the year and a half I've been here is how little people in Richmond actually know about us. And there's wonderful partners in the room today who do know a lot about us and have been great supporters. We've worked together on a lot of things. But there's, just this week, I had 2 or 3 meetings with institutions and funders and others who said, oh, I think I've heard of that organization before, or tell me more about it. And so for me, we have a personal challenge to really have some greater impact in the place where we literally call home, let alone every other place where we could operate. So I think it's a little bit of acknowledgement that there is still a lot of room to build partnerships, to bring more of what we have as assets to the table. And again, not shy away from acknowledging that type of work has to be done.
So as a person new, so we have some folks who are, been in Richmond for their entire lives. Anyone in Richmond like in the last year or so? Like really new to Richmond? Okay. Year and a half for you?
Yes.
Well, okay. I'm curious, these assets, the uniqueness of Richmond, like what helped you identify some of those, get to know some of those? Like as a newcomer and getting to know the space, like what helped you figure out what was here?
Conversations, mostly.
Yeah.
Just getting to know as many people as I could. Talking to the very talented folks in my organization alone and just getting to know what they see. But then it became also just a thing about listening to what was not being said about the city. I'll just take it from the perspective of small business lending. Robust small business market actually in Richmond. We obviously at VCC have a very significant interest in focusing on BIPOC communities. Is how we do our work with small business lending. Been learning a lot about the challenges of Black-owned businesses in the city is that they're tied to the real estate that they own. And as the city expands and grows economically, those Black-owned businesses are being squeezed to basically an exit decision because the value of the real estate is such now that it's worth more than the business. And it's much easier for them to sell the business to a real estate developer or asset owner than to kind of figure out, well, how do I grow my business? How do I expand my business along the way? So for me, sitting in the seat of being the head of a community development financial institution, that's like the type of thing where I'm supposed to say, wait a minute, we're supposed to be focusing our energy on a solution to that. And so that's where the learning from listening can translate into the work we could potentially do.
That's great. That's really powerful. Richmond sometimes struggles with balance, right? Like how do I both move forward and keep Richmond on the list, the place to be, like have your business, strong corporate presence, but then also deal with the long-term problems, the long-term impacts of decisions that were made generations ago that we've been talking about. How do you position the work that you do supporting that balance? Because like we've got kind of corporate interests and the things that kind of matter in that space, but we're also thinking about what matters in the community, and how do you balance those? And like maybe sometimes they're in contention and you gotta wrestle with that too.
Yeah, I think as Amber mentioned, we had the pleasure of working together at Opportunity Finance Network before I came over to VCC. And by the way, she really ran the show. I didn't have anything to do with it.
Just making it clear.
Make it clear. But one of the things that we got to do is really go around the country and see the work that CDFIs were doing in cities of 50,000 on up to New York City at 25 million. So you get to see the work that people are doing. And what I realized is that tension you just described is everywhere. Where organizations like CDFIs and partnerships with foundations and others can do is actually take the time to learn from how other cities and other groups are addressing some of these challenges. And what you learn is that everybody has to do it with a little bit of innovation based upon who they are, what their identity is. And again, being willing to confront what makes you unique, good and bad, will lead to those solutions. I'll give you an example. There's a CDFI outside of Houston, Texas, that basically started to do nothing other than buy used cars and resell used cars to largely Latinx families. And it's because there's no public transportation system. And so their whole interest was to sort of say, how do we help these families And the breadwinners in the families connect to the job market in Houston, which is robust. So is it an affordable housing issue there in Houston? Sure. Is there a job financing issue in Houston? Sure. But what this CDFI noted was the biggest barrier to addressing all of that was people just needed a car. Yeah. So they built out a very innovative auto finance business. That's a CDFI. That's not Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, or anybody else. That's a CDFI. It was financed by local banks and local foundations. And so, again, bringing the local partners together around a real local issue leads to an innovative solution. That is probably not Richmond's issue. But what is Richmond's issue? And spending the time saying, sort of examining that is, I think, where the win comes. Mm-hmm. So it's more than just saying we have an affordable housing issue or we need to finance more jobs. It's really sort of saying, well, okay, what are the real ways in which the lever can be moved? Mm-hmm. And then you go to the foundations, and then you bring your partners, VCC and LISC and others, we can come together, and then probably have more impact around those solutions when we do that.
So the collaboration that is necessary to move us forward, it does remind me of, so you mentioned a village, right, around a person. We are the result of so many things, so many influences of people. That can work in good ways, that can work in negative ways too, right? Mm-hmm. When you think about this, more than a moment, right? If this is going to be something that is lasting, but we got to do it together. This is a partnership thing. So what does it mean to you to be part of a movement, sustaining this, making it resilient, as opposed to just a moment in time?
I think I missed your name, but one of the young ladies said it really well earlier in the Q&A, that you have to acknowledge, first off, problems are cyclical, challenges are cyclical, solutions are often a reflection of the moment. So you have to kind of assume that you have to go through cycles of this change, cycles of these ideas and innovations to get to outcomes. You can't, there's no point where we say there is officially no longer an affordable housing issue. There is officially no longer racism in Richmond. There is officially no longer a need to finance new jobs for immigrant families. That will always be there because the country's dynamic, the world's dynamic. The challenges we create for ourselves and are created for us are dynamic. So I think it's starting with that acknowledgement that there is no end to this work. It is a continuous thing we do. This is not easy work. It costs everyone to do it effectively, and it's okay because I didn't stop talking to my brothers because he hit me when I was in third grade. So you have to keep this engagement going.
The rationale for an investor in something that's perpetual, right? Oftentimes when we think about a rationale for investment, when am I going to get my return? Mm-hmm. Like 2 weeks, 2 months, I want my return back.
Yeah.
So if we think about impact investing and work that's continual, like what is that opportunity, and how do you invite that kind of investment in this kind of work that is about us continually, iteratively working through these solutions?
Yeah, I think it is iterative, but you do still have to have milestones.
Okay.
So that's that I can't go to a foundation and say, just write me a check for $10 million and I'll see you in 5 years and not show you anything and then expect you to write me another check for $10 million.
We're not gonna say no.
Yeah.
Anyone in the room with that kind of check, but yes, please.
But you do have to set goals. You have to try to sort of measure some outcomes you'd like to get to, and put that in front of the investors. And as they see that you're able to do that, it gives them incentive to want to work with you, want to invest with you. But I think you also have to be very clear about the principles that you stand for on the front end. So if equity is something that you are striving for in your investment, you cannot ignore that in the application process. You cannot ignore that in the contract process with them, because you will not get to do the things that you said you wanted to do because people are gonna live up to the level of what you're putting in front of them. And if you don't put it in front of them, they're never gonna expect you to put that out there.
Yeah. When you think about you and your team and these partnerships across the community to do this work, what kind of partnerships are they're just critical to this? Like, who else is on this team with you to do this work?
First and foremost, it has to be the community, whether it is the Cristo Rey School or it is the local small businesses. It's the institutions in the community have to be a part of it. That's what we ultimately, a lot of our lending and funding goes to them, because we know that they actually have the connection. We don't have the connection. At the end of the day, we're pushing money. That's what a bank does. We're trying to also facilitate grants and technical assistance and other things that are necessary besides lending. But who are you lending to? So it's got to be those community partners first and foremost. Then it has to be, in many ways, a constant communication between the financial institutions, the community development corporations, the CDFIs like VCC, the formal banking sector, the formal government sector. And that dialogue has to continue. What it cannot do is happen here and the communities here. It's like if that's not all together, then we design some fun stuff that makes us think we're smart and it looks great for us, but it may land flat in the community and not actually be of any value. It's Amber's point about why the person said, when the milk spills over, go pick up your glass. She's like, you don't know what my problem is. Go fix your own problems. And that's an example of that disconnection that can occur. So it's got to be, still rooted.
Yeah. I've got two more questions for you. As you do this work, you show up to this work every day as a human being with all your life and all your experiences, and you're a human being that cares about this work deeply. What gives you hope? Like, what do you hold on to do this work every day?
Mostly, I think the willingness of so many people to go along as well. That's the thing that probably gets me the most excited, is every day having to go in and convince 86 other people that we're collectively doing something that is going to have deep impact in communities, that is shaping the way capital is allocated, that's influencing policy. And I get the opportunity to sit on the stage and articulate it, but what it really comes down to is, the underwriter on our team thinking about what's put in front of them in terms of a loan, and being willing to consider that there are areas of inequity that might have led to why this borrower's credit score is X, Y, or Z, or might have led to why there's a lower valuation on the asset that's being financed. So it's fun to do the speechifying about it all, but really it's about that collective. So my hope comes in the more and more I see that, in my team personally, in the partnerships with other organizations, in the new innovations and willingness for things for funders to take on. All of that is what I think feeds me.
As we wrap up, we've got some super smart, dedicated, talented, good-looking, beautiful people in this room. As we're learning, what's maybe one or two things that each of us could do, should do, leaving here as we go back into life and work and back out into the rain here in Richmond? What's one or two things that we all can do, should do?
So I'm going to give credit to our dear marketing and communications director, Valerie Lee, who has spent a year and a month whacking me over the head to use something called asset-based language that I've never heard of in my 50 years before. But it really is the concept that we cannot talk about communities purely from the perspective of their deficits.
Yes.
And I guess the challenge to everyone is to consider utilizing language that speaks about communities as assets, as places that have possibility, that have people who have worth, and approach solutions believing that and knowing that, versus you know, the way in which we're often taught to look at communities and people.
Yeah. Would you please show your appreciation to Amir for spending some time with us? Thank you. I do love, you know, we had John Lewis here, and he did his Good Trouble talk, which was powerful, on Arthur Ashe Boulevard. But you get in good trouble for good people. And so often we forget that there are good people everywhere.
Yeah.
And just because your life's not my life, and your neighborhood's not my neighborhood, you're good people. So we get in good trouble for good people.
That's right.
I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for choosing to show up and to be in this space and be part of the Learning Exchange. We've already clapped a little bit for this team that put us on, but would you please, once again, show your appreciation to the VCC Social Enterprises team. So you notice there are cameras. Shout out to VPM for partnering with us to capture this. So we will share this. As you know, every talk that we've done in the series is on the website, and so as we kind of cut and produce this, we'll be able to share that with all of you. There are some of your team here. Like, have conversations, get in touch with folks, and if you have direct questions for them, who's on the VCC Social Enterprises team? Wave your hand up. All right, these are the folks you can talk to if you have questions about opportunities that are there. And then, like I said, we'll update the website, look in your inbox, we will send you some stuff. And finally, if you are going to go and leave now and you're in the garage, that back table, we will validate your parking for those of you parked in the back. All right? My name is Todd B. Waldo. I am so glad to spend time with you all. Thank you for being here. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.